This is Brenna Quigley, your personal geologist and terroir guide. Join me on a road trip through the geologic history of your favorite wine regions around the world. This is Roadside Terroir. Hi everyone, this is Brenna, and welcome back to Roadside Terroir. We are so happy to be back. This is our first episode of Season 3, Farming for Terroir, and we're so excited to have you along on this global journey into the world of viticulture and terroir. Thank you for being here. As this is an entire season dedicated to farming, we felt it was necessary to begin by mentioning that farming, especially at a high level, cannot be done without farmers. And here in California and throughout the United States, an incredible amount of our industry, our sustenance, and our livelihoods absolutely rely upon immigrants and migrant workers. In Napa County specifically, immigrants make up 33% of the total workforce and 75% of workers in the wine and vineyard industries. We should all be doing our part to support the people who make up the heart and backbone of our industry. If you're interested in learning more or donating to support this important cause, we suggest checking out the California Farm Workers Foundation at californiafarmworkers.org and Napa Valley Together at napavalleytogether.org. To celebrate our season and the people who make this conversation possible, Roadside Terroir will be donating 10% of all Roadside Insider and Insider Plus memberships purchased in the month of August. Check out our website, roadsideterroir.com, to learn more. Please don't drink and drive, and remember to keep your eyes on the road. This episode contains explicit language. I'm very glad I'm not driving right now.
Well, our cars would not be able to. I know. We walk down from the bottom when we're in shape and not in a hurry. And I struggle.
I too struggle.
Here we are. Crazy, huh?
It's been nearly 2 years since our last episode of Roadside Terroir, and I find myself back in France, back in the vineyards, with my dear friend, Paul Wasserman. We're swooning over a beautiful view and even more beautiful Paleozoic granite, digging our hands into the soil and hanging on every word of our host, Cyril Courvoisier.
Floraison finie, ici. Il reste que les blancs, moitié. Okay. Come on.
Covered. Ground cover. Vegetative cover.
It's just crushed by foot and hands when I work, but we passed a lot of times to work during the year. So, but in May it was like this.
Okay.
When I remove some birds, I crush a little bit, and after a lot when it's straw. It's better to crush when it's straw because it don't come back.
Right.
Yeah. And it gives a lot of straw to protect for the summer, to protect for the hot and dry weather. And it gives some fertilizer for the next autumn, winter, when the fungi and bacteria will eat the straw.
We're in the tiny but mighty appellation of Cornas in the northern Rhone. At about 300 meters elevation, we overlook the famed Reynard and Chaillot vineyards just below us, and the mighty Rhone River in the distance. This vineyard has what's it called?
Les côtes. It means the slopes.
Okay.
Les côtes. It's 0.3 hectare. So it's quite small. The plot is larger because it's more than 0.4, but I decided to keep some trees around, and inside I decided to plant some trees or rosemary or many things to bring the biodiversity, to cut the wind for the climate, to avoid some breaks on the spruce during May, for example, and because of the landscape also. And maybe when you work in the good landscape, maybe you will do a good job. And maybe good wines too. So it's very important, I think, and it's true for every job.
A lot has changed in the past 2 years. The wine industry is in crisis. Drinkers aren't drinking, and young consumers are raising valid concerns about the negative health effects of alcohol. For the first time in decades, there's too much wine. In my opinion, there's too much uninspiring, conventionally farmed wine. And an oversupply of wine produced without its sense of place has called into question the relevance and the reverence of this centuries-old craft. Globally, the evidence of our changing climate and the consequences of our collective lifestyles are mounting. We've watched devastating fires rip through Los Angeles, floods in Texas, and scorching heat waves throughout Europe. And in the tiny little microcosm of my own life, I have become a mom. An event that instantaneously turned up the volume on my awareness about the fragility of life on Earth. Roadside Terroir has always valued farming, but in the wake of these seismic shifts in the industry and the world, it feels imperative and obvious that the stories we tell here should focus on the most meaningful topics. And for us, that's farming. Farming with the intention of revealing a sense of place. Farming done by brave, committed, and talented people with a deep respect for the earth and its inhabitants. The people who are farming for terroir. If the wine industry is going to survive the impact of a changing climate, it's going to do it through farming. And if the industry is going to survive a changing audience of consumers who care about the planet, about people, and about health, it's going to be through storytelling. So this season, we've set out to tell some stories about farmers and the land that they love. And as soon as we started this search, we knew we had to start with Cyril Courvoisier. Cyril's domaine is near the northern edge of the village of Cornas, nestled beneath the famed amphitheater of vines. He was the cellar master at Domaine Colombo just down the road for several years before starting his own domaine in 2011. He farms a tiny 2.5 hectares spread across 3 villages. Cornas, where we are now, the much bigger appellation of Saint-Joseph to the north, and the little-known Saint-Péray to the south, where he makes impressively fresh and mineral white wines. Cyril is one of very few, if not the only, regenerative vigneron in the northern Rhone, and he consults for some of the best farmers in France, including the incredible farmers Tomoko and Guillaume of Chantrève, just to the north in the Côte d'Or. This little parcel of Les Côtes is brimming with life. The ground is covered in a dense layer of grass that has been flattened down to form a soft, golden carpet over the soil. There are trees here, bees buzzing and birds singing their little hearts out. Even on this hot summer day, the vineyard feels pleasant and fresh.
I treat 2 times here. After flowering, I treated 2 times, but no mildew, no oidium, just because I have a black rot. And black rot is more powerful than mildew for me.
What is? I don't know.
It's a fungi which was more on Bordeaux before, because it needs a lot of wet weather. Wet conditions, and with the climate change we have 1 or 2 degrees more during the spring, but also wetter spring than before. We have a rainy and wet spring now, and since 14 we found a lot of black rot, and is very powerful, and with copper and sulfur you have difficulties to fight. So for me we have to work on the immune system of the vines. We have to close the door. This is black rot.
Oh.
Okay. But I observe also, we see here, that there's an insect which is in my plot, and he eats the interior of the of the damage.
Okay.
And it's interesting because the fungi is here, but you also have some eggs for the next contamination, next cycle. So if you have an insect or a snail, I don't know, who eat this, it's it's okay. You will cut the cycles
Okay.
and limit damages.
So everything has a natural predator, or almost everything.
Yes,
and
I hope. But I think it's possible, yeah. So we have 2, 3, 4 ways to fight against. The first one is predators, okay? We have also the immune system of the plants. Mm-hmm. You have also a lot of bacteria, fungi, yeast on the leaves. Mm-hmm. And if you use a lot of copper and sulfur, they will die. So the place will be available. So you have to limit the doses. And I think all is around. It could be rosemary, roses, blackberries, produce some antioxidant. Mm-hmm. And if you have mycorrhizae, this small molecule can pass through the soil from a plant to another one. Mm. And maybe the fungi will produce and give some antibiotics. Mm-hmm. It's an hypothesis, but it's possible, I think. Yeah. So we have a lot of way to fight. Yeah. But the difficulty is, when should I stop or limit copper and sulfur to let the nature do the work? Because when I use copper and sulfur, I kill the nature. Right. So the balance is difficult to find. In 22 it's easy, 24 it's very difficult. Mm-hmm. There's no recipe.
Cyril's farming philosophy is such a beautiful and simple concept: to mimic nature, to stop forcing the natural world to be something that it's not, to stop getting in the way.
So you planted this, it had been a forest, right?
Yes, it was like around pines and oaks, juniper. And I cut the trees and rebuilt the walls 11 years ago and planted in 15. So just 10 years old.
And because sometimes other people, they say, oh, he can do no-till because it was a forest before.
Yes.
Because there's lots of organic matter.
It's true. The reality is I can keep the grass with the vineyard, with some wild roses, with some rosemary, with some trees, and without competitions, because it was forest and the fridge is big and full.
The fridge is full of food.
Yes, because you have a lot of organic matter in the soil. You can retain water, you can have a lot of nutrients for everyone. Mm-hmm. If your fridge is very small and empty, the first one will take some food or drink, will stay alive, the other will die. So for me there's no war, because there's a lot for everyone. Yeah. When it's rich like this, you also have some birds, some insects, and everyone brings something. Everyone is more powerful. Yeah. And you have a lot of connection with the life. With mycorrhizae, bacteria, fungi, worms, rabbits, what you want.
How much do you think through where your limit is between nature and farming? Like, is that
I don't know, but at the beginning here, for me, it was to till. Uh-huh. I planted to till. Yeah. It would be organic, okay, but I would like to till. Because it's the model, Jean-Louis Chave, Chapoutier, everyone who did organic here do it like this. Mm-hmm. The first year I planted, 15, these small terraces, I decided to cover them with some wood chop. Mm. Because when I cut the trees, I chop the small branches, I cover the soil with wood chop. And the second year, 16, I covered all the rest with wood chop. First harvest was 17 with no tilling. Only 4 treatments in May, but not after. Very small doses of copper. And everyone has mildew, not me. Mm. And my wife knows very well mildew because she observed a lot of vineyard here in Northern Rhône between Saint-Joseph and Saint-Péret, within Cornas including. And it's not possible. And we checked, no mildew. And I said, okay, there's something more than what we listen or we read in the book about mildew and vineyard. It's maybe possible to have a better immune system. And it was the beginning of my way of farming. It was completed with what I saw in the forest, because I said to myself, in the forest, nobody sprays some insecticide or fungicide or nothing. There's no fertilizer. How does it work? And after I said, okay, the forest works like this alone, and it works. We should do the same.
As beautiful as this philosophy is, this kind of farming is not only incredibly rare today, but also incredibly risky, particularly in areas as difficult to farm as the impossibly steep granitic slopes of the northern Rhone. In this sense, Cyril and his vineyards are kind of like a beacon for all of the things we're searching for: responsible, intuitive farming that respects the entire ecosystem of the vineyard. This place is clearly special, and Cyril's expertise and, frankly, bravery are pushing the limits of how people thought they could farm the steep slopes of the Rhone, or how people think they can farm, period. The reality is, this is a complicated and highly contentious topic. Farming practices vary all over the world. They vary based on countless factors: terroir, history, tradition, politics, trends, finances. Money doesn't feel as wholesome to talk about as saving the bees, but people's livelihoods are at stake here. How someone farms is deeply personal and inherently practical. Farming has become a popular topic amongst wine pros and savvy consumers. But how much do we really know about these practices and their implications? Do we even understand what we're asking for, or what effort and sacrifices go into putting a little sticker on a label? Conventional, organic, biodynamic, regenerative, holistic agroecology. How many of these words can each of us actually define, let alone form real opinions on? How do we, as wine professionals and consumers, make meaningful choices related to the farming of the wines we love? And are we really saving the world by changing our drinking standards? We certainly aren't here to try to answer all of these questions, but we are ready to learn and to immerse ourselves in this whole fascinating world. And because this is Roadside Terroir, and we have some sick inclination towards complexity, we're going to take this already advanced conversation one step further. Not only are we going to dig into the intricacies of farming, but we want to see how these practices and philosophies are connected to the geology, the actual rocks and soil, how they're connected to the terroir itself. Join us as we explore the intersecting worlds of terroir and farming in Season 3, Farming for Terroir. We're so grateful to have you along for the ride. So, let's get started. We'll come back to Cyril and his beautiful vineyards later on in the season. But for now, let's take a step back and start to break down some of the concepts we're going to need to understand in order to begin this farming odyssey. I've always approached terroir as a complicated, integrated system where the rocks are just one factor in a big web of complex interactions. I work in vineyards all over the world in every rock type there is, so it's always been obvious to me that these different geologies and the different terroirs they support each present unique challenges to the people farming them. The rich clay limestone soils and humid growing conditions of Burgundy are a world away from the hot, dry summers and volcanic soils of Napa Valley, or even from the steep, sandy granitic slopes of Cornas. From a farming perspective, your terroir is going to dictate so much of what you're able to do: moisture, disease pressure, nutrient availability, ripeness. So let's first take a look at terroir and the ways that it might impact a vine's growing conditions.
Yeah, it's a direct interaction. The terroir determines how you are going to farm. Your soil and your vine density will determine how you farm.
This is Michelle Smith-Chappelle of Domaine Chappelle, former New York City sommelier turned Beaujolais farming badass and mom of 4. We sat down together in New York a few months ago to discuss how she made the transition from big city somm to small town farming maverick.
So I started as a sommelier in New York. I was previously the wine director for the chef's table at Brooklyn Fair. And then I found myself in the Beaujolais because in 2013 I went for a tasting at Domaine La Pierre. And I, by chance, ended up meeting my husband there when I showed up for the tasting a bit late. So the winemaker sent one of his employees of the Domaine, and it was David. So David and I stayed together from that point forward. So he was working, he was farming and in the winery at La Pierre. So he already came from that background. Myself, I had knowledge of those things, but I had never done it hands-on. So it was to learn a whole new métier while doing it from scratch. And furthermore, from my husband, which is full of its own challenges. But yes, so we now currently farm 7 hectares of vine on the slopes of Beaujolais, all the historic traditional areas of plantations. We farm Gamay only, and it's divided between the Cruz Fleury, Cherub, and Régnier, where we live and have our winery.
Michelle and David had the unique opportunity to arrive in a region and, over time, select sites based on their terroir with the intention of farming them in a certain way.
All of our vines are organic. That's a deliberate choice. What we really seek when looking for a new parcel to work is one, altitude. So while it's up in the Cruz, it's usually higher in altitude and on a significant slope.
For the Chapelles, the terroir was key to farming the way they knew they wanted to.
The altitude allows it to have a longer ripening period.
Okay.
So all of the different aspects of the wine can come together over a long period of time rather than being forced in one. That typically what you would want from that is it to result in like an elegance of the structure of the wine. Mm-hmm. And then the slope allows for drainage. So the vine itself won't be sitting in water, which can bring some different, mostly maladies like mildew and other things that can come with humidity resting around a vine that's so close to the ground. Mm-hmm. In Beaujolais, it's mostly the traditional plantation, and still the majority of plantation is in a freestanding bush vine or gobelets, not on trellises, but basically a cep that has 5 arms to it and 2 buds per arm. Mm-hmm. And that keeps it in a shape where the vine is kind of inward on itself, which...
Mm-hmm. Like a goblet.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of reasons why it was done that way, planted that way. One, a very high density, so 10,000 ceps per hectare. And even some of the older generations try to cheat customs a little bit and put in a couple extra ones. So it can get up to like 12,000 ceps per hectare in some areas.
As you'll see in a moment, all of these factors, vine density, training, pruning, and so on, are determined by the terroir. So let's talk about terroir for a second. Even though I've spent a lot of time with many of you, I don't think I've ever actually defined terroir for you, in the context of my own work at least. The definition of terroir that I like best says that terroir is the complete natural environment in which a particular product is produced. In this case, wine. This complete natural environment includes the rocks, the soil, the slope, climate, and even the human traditions in both farming and winemaking that all come together to make that product, in our case, a particular single vineyard bottling of Cru Beaujolais, taste unique, meaning taste different from a different single vineyard. Essentially, to make that wine taste of the place. The geology, the rocks themselves, are just one little piece of this. I am obviously biased, but I believe that they're the first piece, the immovable piece that lays the foundation, literally, for all of the other factors. From the climate to the winemaking, it all starts with the bedrock. The bedrock, or parent material, or mother rock, as they say in French, is that upper, intact layer of Earth's crust that has taken thousands, if not millions, if not hundreds of millions of years to get to where it is today. In Beaujolais and in the northern Rhone, the bedrock is primarily ancient Hercynian granite that formed during the formation of the supercontinent Pangaea, something like 300 million years ago. It's an intrusive igneous rock, meaning that it was once molten magma beneath Earth's surface that slowly cooled and crystallized into a solid rock with large interlocking crystals that we can see with our naked eyes. Different rocks have different properties. Some are hard and some are soft. Some break down easily and others resist nature's elements. They have different chemical makeups. Some have more iron or calcium, silica, etc. than others. This chemical makeup affects lots of things, including its color, hardness, weatherability, and so on. Granite, by definition, is made up mostly of white and pink minerals, quartz and feldspar, that are strong and resistant to erosion, and a sprinkling of darker minerals like biotite and amphibole. Rock is the original building block of soil, or said another way, soil forms from rock. Soil is defined as the very, very thin top layer of the earth composed of a mineral component, organic material, water, and air that all together are capable of supporting plant life. That mineral component comes from rocks, and different rocks made up of different minerals produce different soils. These soils can vary in their texture, their chemistry, their ability to hold and share nutrients with the plant, their ability to hold or radiate heat, their ability to hold or drain water, and lots more. All of that is initially determined by its parent material, the rock. Remember that little sprinkling of darker minerals I mentioned in the granite? They are minerals with more iron and magnesium, and they're less stable on Earth's surface than the bigger pink and white crystals. So they break down, literally dissolve or chemically weather, into clay and metal oxides. When they break down, the rock essentially becomes unglued, and the rest of the crystals just fall apart. This is why we refer to these sandy soils as decomposed granite. They're made up almost entirely of the little pink and white crystals of the original rock. But the geology influences more than just the soil. Some rocks resist erosion and form high peaks, where others dissolve away into gentle valleys. In this sense, geology controls the topography and shapes the landscape. And that landscape will determine how weather moves through the topography, where there's rain, where it's dry, where there's hail, frost, a cool breeze, or relentless sun. And all of this influences us, the people who are living on and working the land. In Michelle's case, all of this has come together to create the specific conditions for gamay in Beaujolais.
David and I, we both agree that Beaujolais is the best form of pruning for gamay on granite soils in Beaujolais, especially on the slopes.
Yeah.
It's the most natural state for it.
The crus of Beaujolais have been planted primarily to gamay for at least 800 years. Famously, back in 1395, Philippe the Bold banished the gamay grape from the Côte d'Or, Beaujolais' neighbor to the north. As we know well, the Côte d'Or is home to rich limestone and clay soils that allowed the naturally vigorous gamay vine to grow wild and produce weak, thin wines. But the sandy, decomposed granites of Beaujolais, however, are incredibly nutrient-poor, limiting soils that help to counteract gamay's wild side. The Goblet pruning and high density further restrict the yield to concentrate the flavors. For centuries, the locals have been fine-tuning their understanding of the terroir to make the wines that we all recognize as Beaujolais. Until, of course, things started to change.
And they're low to the ground as well. And that is the only issue I would see with it. In the past, that was done to protect the vines. But now, with global warming, it's more to take it off the ground.
Okay.
So to rise
Because
the
it's so
Goblet
hot.
up higher.
Okay.
Yeah, it can be very hot, and there's more vine diseases now. So when you have something so low, if there's any herbs around it, and we plow, but we use cover crops, and so if you have a vine that's very low to the ground and you have the grass around it, then if there's humidity, the grapes are gonna suffer from that right away. So it's to take it off the ground. Now that we're in an era that has seen more malady of the vine than ever before. And each year gives its own challenges that if you ask previous generations, we've only been farming since 2018, so our reference isn't that long, but we constantly are asking the farmers who grew up in Beaujolais, who were farming with their grandparents in Beaujolais, we asked them as a reference, and they agree that they've never seen the amount of things that didn't exist before, like black rot. And more odium, which tended to be a disease you found more in the south with a lot of wind.
Okay.
But it's present every year in Beaujolais in smaller degrees.
So it's closer to the ground than it seems like the warmth maybe was a good thing for it to have that like residual heat from the soil?
In the summer, yes, and in the winter, before they would do a boutage and put the soil onto the vines. You know, you clear between the path, and then the excess soil as you're plowing goes onto the vines, and it would protect it for the winter. And then in the summer, you remove that soil off of it and move it back to the center of the vine, and then it brings warmth as well to help with ripening.
Okay.
With the sun, of course, and the reflection of the silica in the soil.
Okay, that's so cool. I've never heard that.
Yeah.
And
old school.
yeah.
It's the old school generations, you know. And we still get schooled all the time. We'll be farming sometimes, and there'll be people that pass by and say like, "Oh, I know that tool. You know, I used to use that when I was a kid. No, you're doing it wrong. You have to do it like this." You know, and I love that because they're excited about it. You know, like, that's how they grew up farming, and then it kind of went out for a while with the introduction of chemical inputs, but they know it. Because they grew up with those things. To me, a lot of those tools are completely foreign. I was a sommelier in New York. Like I didn't, you have to learn as you go.
Yeah. What is the tool called?
The pioche?
Yeah.
Yeah, pioche. And then there's a lot of different types of pioche as well that are like ones that look like shovels or I don't actually even know the names of all of them. But the pioche is just a garden hoe. So it's, just... Yeah, exactly. You can imagine how that goes. And that is one step by one step. So you're working around the base of the vine in order to remove the grasses, and it's one by one. So just imagine you have a hectare with 10,000 vines. You need to do that 10,000 times.
Michelle and David are in such an interesting position, reviving traditions from previous generations that had been nearly lost, all while the climate continues to shift around them. Many of these traditions have been forgotten in only very recent years as conventional farming, primarily the use of herbicides and synthetic fertilizers, rapidly altered farming practices around the world in just a matter of decades. Conventional farming took hold for many reasons, and none of them were originally ill-intended. Post-World War II France was in a difficult spot, as was much of the world. Agricultural production had dropped by 40%, and the population, particularly working men, had suffered a severe loss. There were over 460,000 casualties in France alone. Hunger was a huge problem throughout Europe, so scaling and streamlining food production was a top priority. Luckily, or so it seemed, the necessary technology for producing high amounts of synthetic fertilizers was already in place. It was the same technology that had been used for making explosives during the war. At the time, cheap ammonia was considered a life-saving miracle. On top of this, land was consolidated in many places to allow for more efficient industrial-scale farming, and the land that was more difficult to modernize was often abandoned, such as the parcel of Les Côtes in Cornas that Cyril would go on to reclaim some 60 years later. These parcels, often the steep or high-elevation ones, were just too difficult to work. Herbicides provided a way to circumvent some of the back-breaking work Michelle has just described, hoeing under each individual vine, by hand, 10,000 times in a row for every hectare. And at the time, all of these chemical inputs were believed to be completely harmless. Today, we're finally starting to understand that herbicides and other synthetic chemicals are not harmless. Several common ones are likely to increase the risk of certain types of cancer, can cause DNA and cell damage, and contribute to neurological conditions as well as liver and kidney-related diseases. They've also been linked to fertility and reproductive problems. Of course, all this depends on the exact type of chemicals, the amounts used, and the kind of exposure to them. We'll link to some of the studies we're referring to in the show notes and save the greater glyphosate debate for another time. But let's just say it's very clear that decreasing the amounts of these chemicals in our food systems and environment would be a good thing for human health. A lot of damage has been done, and there are still countless vineyards in just about every region in the world farmed with synthetic chemicals. Beaujolais has been notorious for their use of chemical herbicides, likely due to the strenuous farming conditions and historically lower prices of the wines. Today, producers like the Chapelles and their passionate friends and colleagues are working hard to change this reputation and to return to the methods that are truly traditional to the region, traditions that existed long before conventional farming took over the landscape.
We just farm like the old school generations. So the majority of what we do is by hand. So that looks like cable plow, pioche. And then in other areas, we can go with the tractor if it's a little bit flatter. We use the Caterpillar tractor. It's been built for slopes. and horse plowing. And then in the winter we use sheep. So the sheep will help to trim the higher grasses as well. They also fertilize. And yeah, so we farm in a context of agroecology where we are trying to minimize our own inputs and let nature kind of work itself out.
And where and when did you learn about that approach?
Well, there's nothing new about it. It's literally just farming like the old school. And we could even do more, you know, the old school people, they used to put peas in their vines because it brought nitrogen, of course, but it also, they can harvest them and they can eat it. There's like a lot of things that people did that were just really practical, which seemed like discoveries to us, but it just makes sense, you know? And of course they could be modified for like current times, but all those things existed. We're not reinventing anything. We're just asking more questions and figuring out what makes sense for our vines. And that takes years and years. But I mean, that's the exciting part. A lot of what we do is just repetition. You know, you're repeating certain movements, but still it's nothing we are doing is reinventing anything. It's just being more thoughtful with the amount of resources that we have. And how can you work smarter and not harder? It's still a lot of hard work. But it's just to be more thoughtful about it.
Yeah.
And to ask the old school generation, because they do know. All of the tools that we use, for the most part, are from 50, 60 years ago. They're found in people's garages after, say, their grandparents passed away, or, you know, so all this existed already. It just got so far away from it. But what makes me excited, what I feel good about, is working in that way. I wouldn't feel as proud, I wouldn't feel as motivated if we didn't work in this way. It's what drives me.
Yeah.
And David as well, of course.
However, while this work is noble and inspiring and wonderful for the region, the Chappelles are doing this at a time when the climate is already becoming unrecognizable from the time these traditions were built.
The old school generations followed a method because it worked for a long time. It's just now you're in a period of whatever you'd like to call it, climatic chaos, that brings a lot of different challenges that the older school generation didn't have to deal with. They had their own challenges. They fought to get the grapes ripe enough in certain vintages. You know, each generation has its series of problems and can find their own response to figure that out.
And in Beaujolais, as in other regions around the world, some of these challenges are already marked in the wines themselves. Particularly throughout a string of very hot vintages in the past 10 years that's resulted in higher and higher alcohol levels in the wines.
I think the Beaujolais, because traditionally, if you talk about in the 70s and the 80s, and these were very light in alcohol wine, you know, very 11.5 would kind of be the maximum. It wasn't uncommon to have a 10% wine. They're lighter in body, fizzier. But yes, which each year with it being hotter and hotter, except for the vintages like 21, 24, if a winemaker is compelled to make a reflection of the growing season, then it's going to look hotter in those years, unless you pick very early, but then you don't have a reflection of the growing season. You have an underripe wine. But no winemaker that I know, not any of the vignerons who farm their vines all year round, and then at the end of the day wants like a 14 to 15% gamay. It's not elegant. It's not something that you personally love, you know. And of course, you want every wine that you make should be something that's very compelling to you, that you feel that you're proud of. But those alcohols will continue to rise. That's just a fact. And no area, no region anywhere in the world will be shielded from that. So even if you are reaping the benefits, it's a temporary moment. And if you're farming with the intention of passing off your vines to someone else in a better state than you took them over, that's certainly our goal. I don't have a solution other than it's for everyone to check their own practices. You know, how can you reduce your own footprint? What can you do to make the vines that you are farming better for the next generation, even with all of the challenges that they are going to inherit because of what we have done in the past? Because that's inevitable. Being able to work a vineyard as a certain privilege, and if you look at it that way, then you only want it to be better for the next generation. Because I want my kids to pass by our vines and to let people know, like, oh, my parents farmed those. You know, look how beautiful they are. There is grass there. There are animals there. There are insects. There's all these things that when you walk in the vines, you should have a sense of wonder. You should feel that, you know, it doesn't have to be you take everything from those vines. Of course, there's some aspect of exploitation that's inherent in the role, but if you take pride in what you're doing and you really think about not yourself, but what can you do to make it better for the next generation? I'm not even casting judgment on anybody. I just want to make that very clear, because there's different reasons why people need to use chemicals on their vines. It's only the government to come in and to help people get out of financial situations that will allow them to farm in a different way. So I'm not placing blame on any farmers, but I do think that if we were in a place where we couldn't farm our vines organically, I would find a different métier. I would plant something else. I love gamay, but I don't know, maybe we'll plant cherry trees everywhere. I wouldn't want to continue. I would want to find a different path in life that could make an impact on my kids and their class.
Farming at this level is a huge commitment and can also come at a huge cost. Michelle and Cyril go to truly heroic efforts to farm their small parcels, and the results are clear in the vines and in the finished wines themselves. But what happens when you consider working like this on a much larger scale? Is it practical or even possible?
Initially, the resistance to do these changes is massive. Cultural resistance. The company doesn't want to go through that hassle. Why we're doing this so complicated? Well, that's the only way to do it.
This is Rodrigo Soto. I've worked with Rodrigo for more than 5 years. He first hired me as a terroir consultant at Quintessa in Napa Valley, where he was the estate director. Our projects together quickly became some of the work that I'm most proud of to this day. And in that time, Rodrigo has become both a friend and a mentor. He's recently left his position at Quintessa to create his own label, along with his wife and 2 daughters, Far Mountain, in the Moon Mountain district of Sonoma, California. Throughout his career, Rodrigo has overseen the conversion of over 3,000 acres of vineyards from conventional to organic and biodynamic farming around the world. He's truly a wealth of knowledge about the intersecting worlds of not just farming and terroir, but winemaking and tasting as well. Rodrigo has a degree in winemaking and viticulture from the Universidad Católica in Santiago, Chile, though most of his expertise was gained from his decades of hands-on experience during the early days of organic farming alongside industry pioneers such as Paul Dolan, Mike Benziger, and the late Alan York.
My brother was in agronomy, and to be honest, I wasn't sure, but I never pictured myself working in an office. And I always thought that being outdoors will be part of my journey. I was a very distracted student at the time, Brenna, and I never got good grades. I would say below average. Always at the border of being expelled from university because of my poor grades. And unfortunately, when I found my path, I realized that I need to elaborate a thesis to graduate. And that was a 6-month thesis with a research work and also a formal presentation to a group of professors. Unfortunately, the thesis was assigned based on your grades. And of course, my priority was very low, so I got a leftover subject. And the leftover subject was on organic farming because nobody was interested at the time. It was considered an alternative method, and I took it. I thought it was cool. My professor was just arriving from Berkeley after her PhD. So she was young, she was dynamic, and I really liked her. So we connect really well. And I was her first student that she took over her wing to make a thesis. So I get a lot of her time, a lot of dedication. And that's how it all started. And my thesis was developed in the only 2 acres that were farmed organically in a vineyard in Chile at the time. And I connect really well with the winemaker. His name is Alvaro Espinosa, and this was at Carmen Vineyards, which is a sister winery of Santa Rita, one of the big stakeholders in Chile. And it happens that I did my research. I realized that many of the things that I have learned at university were not compatible with what I was reading about. I thought that The way that I was taught was to fight nature, not to work with nature in many different ways. And I was a little disappointed and I was a little troubled, to be honest. And that is how I present my thesis. I realized that nature was a matrix and it was not an isolated variable. Again, I get a very poor grade for my thesis, unfortunately, because I couldn't explain to my professors that a statistical model was not the best way to evaluate what I was doing. They wanted to see an isolated variable and proven rather than an integrated model that will see everything as a whole. And I have a problem with that. I always have an issue with that way of thinking. So I realized, well, maybe I need to find people that think like that.
And so he did just that. Rodrigo went on to intern at Fetzer Winery in Mendocino County, California, where he crossed paths with the revered biodynamic consultant Alan York. Alan became a friend and important influence for Rodrigo, and they later worked together in several different places from New Zealand back to Chile, where they first introduced biodynamics to Chilean vineyards. This was also around the time that Rodrigo first met his soon-to-be good friend and colleague, Pedro Parra. Pedro, of course, would go on to become the world's leading expert on terroir, and, obviously, a big hero of mine. But more on all of this later. Rodrigo's career would take him to vineyards all over the world, where he worked tirelessly to improve wine quality by utilizing terroir and improving farming.
It started with the farming. I was very young, and to be fairly honest, Brenna, I thought that biodynamics was the coolest thing, and it was different to what I learned, period. I didn't have any way of proving that was worse, better, or the same as conventional farming. So all that happened later in my career when I start seeing results, when I start seeing or comparing things. There's a tendency to talk about more the health implications of organic farming. At the time, I was not that concerned about the health, and I never tried to carry myself a green flag. What I was thinking at the time is, what are we doing to increase or improve quality? And for me, quality comes with the capacity of plants to adapt to their place. So one of the first things that called my attention was the use of herbicides. When you create that level of destruction, and going back to the days of my thesis, Brenna, it was a biological control, so I set traps in the vineyard, compare a conventional with an organic. The traps in the organic vineyard were full of insects at the end of 1 week. The traps of a conventional farm, I could see my footprints from the week before. They were exactly in the same place, and the trap was completely empty. And it called my attention. What's going on here? It feels desolated. It feels like a desert or like the moon's surface. And I realized, but plants are living here. This cannot be right. And this doesn't feel healthy for the plants, neither to the people that work there.
It wasn't until later on in his career, when he found himself working with the Benzingers in Mendocino, California, that he really started to understand the connections between farming and the actual taste of the wines.
And Mike Benzinger at the time was trying to increase the amount of properties farmed biodynamically. And they created a program because only their best wines was being done biodynamically, and all the rest was conventional. So of course that was a problem for the brand. And Alan York was consulting for them twice a week. So I get the chance to work with Alan twice a week for the next 6 years. So we took over a bunch of properties. Some of them were farmed with people that you met recently, like Phil Courvoisier. That, of course, that was a no-brainer, was an immediate sink. But there were some other properties that were farmed conventionally. So the next step was to farm them sustainably and then organic and hopefully someday. So we worked with 45 different growers at the time, which was significant. So the experience for me as their winemaker at the time was that I was able to compare conventional, organic, and biodynamic sources. And that was very clear for me, that the best performers by far were the biodynamic properties, then the organic, and the fillers or the extenders were the other properties that were just sustainable. So it was very clear for me, and that took a few years. I mean, at the time, I had been working with organic farming for 10, 12 years. And for the first time that I was able to compare and see the differences.
Here, Rodrigo is specifically referring to the actual quality of the fruit from the vines, as well as the quality of the finished wines.
Not only that, but at the very end, you see that you're running into other issues like condition and sun exposure and other things, that those vineyards were exhausted in many cases, the ones that were mistreated. And in other cases, the problems were completely the opposite. You realize that vineyards and properties are just like people. They have different temper, they have different character, and they need to be treated very different. So when you apply a cookie-cutter farming mentality, it's very, very challenging to nail it in every single property. I mean, you need to adapt, and for that you need different equipment, you need different philosophies, you need different techniques. So that took a while, but at the same time, you realize if you want to pursue quality, that's the way to do it.
This is a huge thing, because unfortunately, even if many of us can agree that good farming is better for our health and for the planet, that still doesn't speak quite as loudly as the improved quality of the actual wine. Wine that tastes better, wine that tastes unique and exceptional, is simply worth more. And in the end, price is the most straightforward way to justify the costs of the farming. Paul Wasserman, who you know well from our last season and the beginning of this episode, is very interested in this idea, particularly as a Burgundian well aware that rising prices need to be able to deliver when it comes to quality. He also happens to have one of the best palates in the business and has been paying close attention to farming practices for decades.
The first, I think, big experience I had with farming was tasting grapes with my very good friend Eva Fricke in Germany. So she had one parcel in Lorsch that was split between her and another vigneron. So same genetic material, same vine age. And she farmed already biodynamically at that time. And the other vigneron was conventional. And tasting grapes right before harvest, you could already see in the grapes the difference. That's the first time I noticed the difference in quality in the bitters. And that has continued ever since. So another example of this would be tasting hedged versus non-hedged vines, cuvées made from the same vineyard, part of it hedged, part of it not hedged, at both Olivier Lamy's domaine and David Croix's domaine. And again, there's just a relaxation in the non-hedged vines. And I've continued down that path, of the quality of the bitters, because wine does need some tension, it does need some bitters, but they're so much more relaxed when vines are farmed well. The second thing is, I think we notice it a lot more since SO2 levels have come down in wine. SO2 kind of traps the finish in this pinched dryness or bitterness, depending on how you feel it, but kind of blocks it. And with less sulfur or no sulfur, we are actually seeing the finishes. We're seeing much longer acidities on wines that are farmed properly. And I do believe that the word salinity appeared in the wine language recently because of that, because of less sulfur and us being actually able to witness quality farming. And there's just more life on the finishes of wines that are farmed very well, and especially when nothing's blocking that showing of life, that proof of life.
These are common expressions of wines that have been farmed at the highest levels. People talk about length, salinity, and life. All of those descriptors that can make a glass of wine feel less like another alcoholic beverage and more like a work of art.
And all those elements start repeating for me through my different experiences in different places, in different vineyards, in different countries. And I start seeing that pattern. That's why I strongly believe that it was not only a cool thing to do. I think it's the only way of doing it correctly in order to reveal sense of place.
This has been just a small introduction to the questions, topics, and people we will hear from in what's shaping up to be a pretty epic season of Roadside Terroir. We'll hear lots more from Cyril, Michelle, Rodrigo, and Paul in the coming episodes, in addition to many more incredible voices from around the world. Join us in just 2 weeks. That's Friday, August 15th, for an exclusive behind-the-scenes peek into one of the most coveted tastings of the year, where we ask some of Burgundy's best producers how farming is reflected in their wines over time. See you soon. Thank you to our guests, Cyril Courvoisier, Michelle Chappelle, and Rodrigo Soto. And thanks, as always, to Paul Wasserman for your commentary and guidance, as well as the encouragement to get this season going. This season wouldn't be possible without your support. Check out our website, roadsideterroir.com, to learn how you can follow along on our travels and how to help support this season by donating, sponsoring, or becoming a Roadside Insider, where you get access to exclusive bonus material, gifts, and more. And remember, 10% of all Insider memberships purchased in the month of August will go towards supporting farm workers and immigrants in California. If you want to support them directly, check out the California Farm Workers Foundation at californiafarmworkers.org and Napa Valley Together at napavalleytogether.org. We would like to extend an extra special thank you to our Grand Cru patrons, Stephen and Amy Lippin. We love you. Thank you for making this season possible. Roadside Terroir is hosted and produced by me, Brenna Quigley, sound engineering, original music, and sound design by Jeff Alvarez, research, writing support, and YouTube videos by Paul Knittel. Thank you to Claire Shaheen, Isa Aslami, Michelle Jolie, and everyone else who helped make this episode a reality.
Brenna, don't forget Michelle.
Or at least open the window.
Oh, the actual... That's better. Like, good luck.